Most people think that storytelling is about making yourself look good, but today's guest believes the opposite. Anna Ong is the founder of What's Your Story Slam, Singapore's longest running live storytelling show, and she is a global storytelling coach who has helped over 300 leaders become impossible to ignore. But before any of that, Anna spent 15 years in banking, hoping that her work would speak for itself. But it didn't. And instead, she learned that great ideas on their own don't necessarily always win, but great storytellers do. So, after leaving the corporate world, Anna started to build What's Your Story Slam from the ground up after not being able to find the stage that she needed or wanted. So, she created the stage by herself. And in this episode, we explore why her show only welcomes stories that are raw, vulnerable, and real, rather than those polished TED Talks or humble brags. So if you've ever said to yourself, I don't have a story, or you've been wondering if your everyday moments even matter, this is the conversation for you. Let's dive in. Every Edit's History interview runs about 60 minutes, but only two-thirds make it into the final cut. The rest, the 33% that I left behind, lives in my newsletter, Annotations. This newsletter is where I share the edits that got cut and also the strategies, the insights, and step-by-step tactics that emerged after the mic is turned off. Think of it as your companion guide to the episode. Richer, deeper, and more actionable. You can subscribe at cheryllau.com/email. Again, the link is cheryllau.com/email. Anna, I think when it comes to storytelling, a lot of people tend to cherry pick stories that make themselves look good, right? But there was an interview that you did where you shared that the most powerful stories are the ones where people are not afraid to show their flaws, but instead they acknowledge their flaws. Tell me more about this.
Okay, so I think in terms of storytelling, when we talk about our imperfections, these are the stories that make us more human. These are the ones that make us more relatable. And it's also in embracing our flaws that we start learning to love and accept who we are. So this is why I love the process about storytelling because it's not just about entertaining other people, but it also allows you to connect not just with others, but with an aspect of yourself that perhaps that you were never that connected with. It requires a lot more introspection, which not I would say not a lot of people enjoy doing. And if you notice at What's Your Story Slam, a lot of the stories they show bits of moments in their like where they make mistakes.
Right. And you know what? Let's talk about What's Your Story Slam. So, for the listeners' context, for those who may not be in Singapore, Anna runs this show, a storytelling competition called What's Your Story Slam. And I attended my first ever What's Your Story Slam last month, and it was amazing because I heard real human beings just like myself share stories that were so well articulated, but and there was like a buildup of like tension, and then they build it up to this kind of like a mic drop moment, and there's like a takeaway, and I was just so blown away at the quality of the storytellers, and realizing that they're someone just like a normal human just like me. I think that's what made it so powerful. So Anna, could you tell us a little bit more about What's Your Story Slam?
So, well, What's Your Story Slam is Singapore's longest running storytelling show as well as its biggest. And it started back in 2019 when I was looking for a place for me to tell stories. Couldn't find any, and I kept complaining to my friends, and my friends told me, "Well, what's stopping you from starting your own show?" So I go, "Well, nothing." So I decided to start one. I didn't really have that much time to be creative with the name, so that's why I called it What's Your Story Slam. Now, most people don't know what's the kind of story I want them to do. So my first storytellers were all my friends, and I told them, I promise I'll help you with crafting your story. I'll make you look good. I'll coach you along the way because the way I see it, especially in Asia, right? You're putting yourself out there to be judged, to be ridiculed when you're sharing your story. There's always that fear. What if people make fun of me? But if someone coaches you and guides you along the way, you get some validation. Go like, I have a story worth telling because you won't believe the number of people I meet who tell me like, I have no story to tell. But Cheryl, since you've been to the show, you've heard their story and you go like, I got a story just like that. It's all about celebrating all these everyday moments that we have in our lives. And I like the fact that most of the storytellers are ordinary folks like you and me because I believe everybody has stories worth telling, not just a story to tell, but a lot of stories worth telling. And it's about learning to see life through the lens of a story and having the techniques and toolkits under your belt to be able to tell a story well. So all the storytellers at What Your Story Slam have to, one, submit their story through me, work with me. I guide them into how to craft it before they can go up on stage. If I don't sign off on their stories, they don't go up on stage. Or if I signed off on their story and they told a different story, they are no longer welcome back on stage.
Mm. One thing I'm so curious about from a
Hmm.
audience perspective
Yes.
is did was there is there resistance from the participants, the storytellers, about choosing a story where they can't just impress the audience, like they have to share, they come to you wanting to tell a story that only makes themselves look good, and maybe that's not quite the narrative you want it to craft with the show's theme, for example. Like, does that ever happen where there's a mismatch in the stories?
There are storytellers who don't seem to have stories like where they have a moment that they question themselves, and I call BS on it because every success behind every success, great success, is a failure. It's always like you don't peak unless you've hit rock bottom. So I would always say like the story often has a journey, and if a person is afraid to share their vulnerability, then they're not really ready to tell a story. Because there are other platforms where they can share their stories of their successes. They can do that on LinkedIn. They can do it when they give a keynote or other industry, just not on my stage because I want real stories.
I'm so nosy now, Anna.
Yes.
When when was there a time where you had to call BS on yourself? There was a story you wanted to share, but like after some introspection, you're like, I think this is a more curated version than the actual story that I'm trying to share.
I would say I'm very candid in terms of sharing all my mistakes and flaws. And if you can see almost on my LinkedIn profile, it's I I think it won't be it's probably more like when I think I'm like lying to myself is when I would probably say it. But also when I don't feel like writing it out, telling it, I know I'm not quite ready to tell the story. Because often, I've also worked with people who want to tell a story, but they can't even articulate it or they're breaking down when they're telling it to me. So I told them, like, I'll ask them this question. Is this story about a wound or a scar? And then they'll go like, what's the difference? Well, a wound is freshly healed skin, whereas a scar is hardened skin. You've been wounded, but over time it's grown to something thicker. So if your story is about a wound that may or may not have completely healed yet to a scar, then you need to give it time or you need to go to therapy so that it
Hmm.
becomes a scar. And once it becomes a scar, you can work with me and we can tell the story. Kind of like
Hmm.
heroes talk about all their battle scars. I
They're not
went into
saying
the
battle
battle.
wounds, they're saying battle
No, it's
scars.
scars, right? Because it's
Hmm.
like I went, almost died, made a mistake, almost died, got caught, but I survived. So, and even victorious stories will always have a story where like they were in danger of losing before they won.
Hmm. Hmm.
And also, would you really want to hear a story about, and then we won this, we won this, we won this? Yeah, I've never really had hardship in my life. Don't you either want to slap them or just tune them out because that's not very interesting.
Mm, mm, mm. I'm so curious now. So, what you know the term humble bragging, right?
Yes.
Humble bragging. Like, what? How would you? how would you classify when someone is humble bragging versus like actually sharing it because there's a takeaway that they want people to know about or to help others? Like how would you know the difference?
I will probably, it varies per person. I will probably ask you, do you feel cringe when you hear it or when you read it, or do you not? Often,
Mm,
it's the physical, visceral response that you have will tell you whether it's a humble brag or not, because I mean, I don't know the science, but I just know the body is a lot wiser than we give it credit for. And so when I listen to a storyteller tell me a story, and when I start cringing, I will write to them and says, "This isn't a real story." And I want to dig. And then I have some people go, "You're giving me your TED talk or your LinkedIn post, and you want me to help you craft into a story, but it's not a story because." Are you saying a decision you made when you were 16? You've never once questioned yourself if it was the right decision, and since 16, you've never had a moment of doubt? Because even I had moments of doubt about storytelling, like the pandemic where all live events were shut down for almost a year. I remember lying on my dining room floor just staring out the window because you can't even go outside, and I thinking like, did I make the right decision on leaving banking to do this entrepreneurial venture? And now nobody's hiring, everybody's panicking, and I don't even know if I can make rent. Like, but you, human resilience, someone told me it's like the power of the human resilience. You pick yourself up and you figure out a way.
yeah.
I went virtual. I went back online. I upskilled myself. I doubled down on storytelling, made friends around the world, started doing virtual shows, hosting virtual events. So and some people would have said, like, I would have updated my CV and started looking for a job. So everybody did different things. I hustled.
Yeah. And as you were sharing about that visceral response, like
Hmm.
when you're telling a humble bragging story, for example, that
Yeah,
made me realize, like, oh, how I know when I am low key humble bragging is like if I think about, okay, if someone I knew, like from university or from my past work
yeah.
experience, like if they saw my post and I'm like, oh, I don't want them to see my post, that's when I know it's my humble bragging post.
I I would challenge that. It's not a humble bragging post. That's you feeling vulnerable because you're sharing something that you care about.
Oh.
And you're worried that they might judge you because their image of you is different from who you are now. Because one of the scariest moments for me was to announce to everyone that I started a company on storytelling. And one of the scariest moments for me was to tell people that I was doing a storytelling show because before I came back to Singapore, everybody knew me as a banker. My entire career was in banking. I had an MBA. I was in banking, and I was quite successful at it. And now I'm telling people I have a show. And you were never even up on stage. We've never even seen you speak at a presentation. And now you barely speak up at work, and now you're like producing a comedy show? Who are you? That was the voices I was hearing in my head. Nobody said that to me. It was me telling that to myself. And most people go, "Oh my God, you're amazing. You built something just because you wanted to." Like nobody's ever told me, "Who the heck are you? Who the heck do you think you are to do a comedy show?" But I told that to me. So I find like we judge ourselves more harshly than other people do. And when you're feeling shy about it, like you don't want your high school friends, it's probably because you really care about it and you don't. And it's in a way, it's like, would they judge you from who you were as they know as who you were as to who you are now?
That's a good point because they knew a past version of me
Mm-hmm.
that has since then evolved, and
Correct.
and so now I'm like, oh no, like if they knew that version of me, but now I'm doing all these bigger things that are really that I'm proud of. How would they perceive me? Like, would they say negative things about me and have all these things in their heads about negative judgments towards me? Yeah, I can see that there is a difference between a humble bragging post versus now talking about something that I'm really proud of, but there is still that vulnerability
Correct. Bec-
that yeah, but
It's
that's something that I can work through.
because
Hmm.
it's something that you care. And this is what I've learned. What other people think of you, whether it's good or bad, is none of your business. Because what they're thinking about you is basically how they think about themselves. So if they're judging you and making fun of you, that tells you more about who they are than who you are. And even they say like, "Oh my God, Cheryl, you're amazing." It's because they see something in you that they see something in themselves. So it's never about you. It's always about them.
Mm. That makes me quite curious for you, Anna. When was the moment when you realized someone's story and like could inspire your story or your story inspired someone else's story? Like, was there a moment, a pivotal moment where you're like, oh, like stories can really like amplify others?
I would say probably when I started sharing my story, my journey from banking to storytelling, I think I've inspired some people to quit their jobs to pursue passion and purpose in terms of their work, which was never my intention. But I go, oh, really? And then some people go like, yeah, you've inspired me to start putting myself out there, or sometimes even having a conversation with someone and I'm explaining like how since I got into storytelling, I started and also like posting more actively on social media. I've been more courageous about sharing my voice and my opinions. And then like also was like after our lunch, I told my boss I need to get more visibility and all that stuff. And then it's just like thanks to you. And I go like, oh, okay.
I really love that point about how you you realize that just by you sharing that transition from banking to now storytelling, that inspired other people to pursue their own dreams and goals.
Yeah.
And I remember about 8 years ago at this point in time, I quit law school. So I went to university, then I went to law school, and I quit law school. And at that time, I remember everyone around me, my classmates, my parents were so upset at me.
Yeah.
They're like, why? Like, why can't you just finish this degree and
Yeah.
then do something else? But I saw an Instagram post from a stranger online at that
Mm.
time who shared about her own experience of quitting her corporate job to create a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And it was just exactly the story I needed to see and hear at that point in time to give me just some
Courage.
groundedness and courage to move forward with my decision. And that's how I realized, wow, content and storytelling can actually be so helpful for other people. And that's how I started sharing about my law school quitting story about 8 years ago. But that said, I remember when I first started storytelling, I would just list the facts. Like I would just list A, B, C, D, step one, two, three. Like that's how I told stories back then. And I feel like now I try to incorporate a lot more like hindsight wisdom that I can extract from the story because it's been 8 years. So a lot has happened. I've learned a lot since then. But for you, Anna, like since leaving banking and starting storytelling versus today, years later, has your storytelling approach shifted? Like how have you become an even better storyteller over the years?
I would say because I spend a lot more time helping people with their stories, I am a much better, I go like, I'm a decent storyteller, but I'm an amazing editor because
Mm.
that's where the value I bring to most of the storytellers. They come with me. I don't tell them how to tell their story. I tell them this is where I would start. This is how, the line I would say you open. This is the stuff that I would delete because editing is about cutting out the fat because they also have to keep it tight. And this is where I would end. I go, all the reflections that you have, save it for LinkedIn. There's no space for that on stage. So if you notice, most of the storytellers don't tend to meander about their reflection because people kind of tune out when people kind of tune out about it. And I would say, if you're telling a story on my stage, I want you to command the audience attention for those 5 minutes they gave you. I don't want them to tune out. So I want to make sure you keep the story tight, we keep it fast paced, we keep it interesting. Well, not everyone cares about the musings. The musings are better read, not heard.
That's such a good point because now that I think about my experience as the audience last month at What's Your Story Slam, it was literally a full body experience because like there's the auditory, there's their facial expressions, so it's kind of visual, there's the pauses and like text on a LinkedIn post alone cannot replicate, or maybe it could a little bit, but like the experience I had from What's Your Story Slam is very different from
Yeah.
just reading a LinkedIn post on my scrolling through my feed. In some of your interviews, you've shared it how you were talking to a friend and you were telling them about wanting to, I think it was like do storytelling in New York or something. And then one of your friends says like, why would you do it in the US when you can do it here in Asia? You're Asian, for
Okay.
crying out loud.
Yes.
Tell us about that conversation.
So that was so I was living in DC at that time, and I was already working on storytelling on the social impact space. I was working with social entrepreneurs on tying up their personal narratives from their personal story as to why they started this business. So tying up their personal story to the company mission and vision. And to the point where I work with their founding teams as to their own personal stories to the company mission and vision. Because why would you give up a career in Wall Street, making all those zeros, to work for a startup with an uncertain future if it was not because you believe in what they're doing? So I was digging out these stories because when I talk to VCs, they go, we don't invest in the business, we invest in the founders. Because it's the idea of the business changes over time, but the character of the founders on who they are stays the same. And it's through their story that you know who they are. I use storytelling to dig it out. I use improv to get them out of their head. So on my way to Bali for my friend's wedding, I stopped by Singapore and I was having dim sum with my friends and I was telling them all about my work there. And then he called me out and says like, well, why are you doing that there when you can make a bigger impact in Asia? You're Asian, for crying out loud. Why are you helping Westerners be better communicators when you already know from experience how Asians have struggled? Funny enough, my friend who told me this is from the West. So is a Swiss guy. So I thought that made sense. And so the idea in my head was I was going to do half and half. I was going to find someone to partner with in Singapore, help build up the business, and then go back to working in the US because I really like working with the social entrepreneurs. Came back to Singapore. Everybody thought I wanted to become an actress, and because storytelling, nobody understood what I meant by personal narratives. Got the question, who would want to care about other people's stories? Until I started What's Your Story Slam, then people started seeing it, and companies started contacting me and wanting to talk to me about it. Because before that, nobody wanted to entertain me. They wanted me to teach them how to do presentations, and I go, I don't do that. I can't teach people what I don't know. I'm not really the best at making slides. So I go like, I was never good at PowerPoint. PowerPoint causes trauma to me. I can't teach people how to do that, nor do I want to because it's not fun.
Looking back at the folks you've helped with storytelling from a more Western background versus from Singapore or from a Asian background, do you notice any differences in whether it's the fears they may have or the confidence that they have, like any differences that you've noticed?
I would say familiarity with storytelling. The ones in the West are much more familiar with how storytelling is, how stories are being told. And they kind of already know where to find their stories. Whereas here, a lot more have a voice in their head that says, I don't have a story to tell. My life is not that interesting. What? Oh, no, I got, no, also, what's your side? No, no, I don't have a very interesting story to tell. I have no story. I have no stories. Like, I don't think I even have a story. It's funny how even my friends who've grown up in the US now moved to Singapore would tell me the same thing. I have no story. And I go like, that's BS because every day there is a story. You
Mm.
change something, like it's a story. You met someone gave you a change in perspective. That's a story. Even like your anecdote about you when you decide to quit law school and then reading that post that just gave you that boost and made you feel you're not alone or crazy in this journey, that's a story.
Yeah. And that reminds me of how last month when I was in the audience at What's Your Story Slam, some of the stories were not like
Big
major in the sense of like
life.
like people don't think it's like a grand story. It's just a
No.
daily day-to-day moment, but they were so entertaining, they were so thoughtful. Like I don't remember everyone's names, but I remember the stories that they
Yes,
shared.
correct. No, and we had fun working on that story as well because it was about it, and it's almost like you get to see a slice of life. Like I think a lot of people want to share their big stories, and I struggle a lot with working with people with very big stories because they don't think they don't see the value in their everyday stories. I go, big stories take about 30 minutes to tell, and you only have 5 minutes to tell a story.
Right. And the small stories actually equally interesting.
Correct.
Yeah, and I remember just leaving the What's Your Story Slam last month thinking like, wow, these are really interesting people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because and everybody has these stories. Like everybody has had these conversations. I go like, if you have kids, the first time your kid tells you "I love you," I've told a story about the first time my niece tells me "I love you," and I realized that it's up on our YouTube channel. And I realized like nobody's in my family has ever told me "I love you" out loud because we don't do that in Asian families. You don't say those words. But she, at 5 years old, just says like "I love you, good night," and she didn't think about it. And so that was like the moment I go, oh my God, like, and it's like, more like how it totally shifted my relationship with her because I used to think like she's a pain and now I love her.
I'm lying in bed in my hotel room, flipping through a magazine when I hear the door knock. I walk to the door and I see my brother. I feel a tug on my shorts and I look down and I see my niece, Nana, looking up at me. She says, I'm sleeping over tonight. I'm on a family vacation. And in my family, that means my parents, my siblings, their spouses, and their spawns. Family time means having all our meals together: breakfast, lunch, merienda, snack, tea time, and dinner. Being the only single person in the family, I get the hotel room all to myself. And over dinner earlier, I casually mentioned to Nana that, hey, maybe you'd like to have a sleepover. It's highly unlikely that her parents will let her alone with me because the last child I babysat came back with a bump on her forehead. But there it is, my brother, in the hotel room, coming into the door, giving me instructions, puts his hands on my shoulder, says, good luck, and then leaves. I stare at the closed door, trying not to panic. This is the first time I've been alone with Nana without adult supervision. That is, without an adult supervising me. I look down at Nana and I ask her, do you need diapers? You're not gonna pee in bed, are you? And she looks at me and says, no, of course not. I'm 5 now. Nana, at 5 years old, is more confident than I ever was at any age. Nana, at 5, would bully her cousins older than her to play games with her based on her rules. And when other kids try to make fun of her, she just looks at them and says, you're just jealous. So when I invited Nana to come over and have a sleepover with me, I thought we would be sitting in bed, reading fairy tales out loud, doing some coloring, braiding each other's hair, quiet stuff. But she has other plans. She wants to jump up and down in bed, run around the room, singing the theme song of Trolls Can't Stop the Feeling on the top of her lungs, rummage through my suitcase and play with my sarongs. And after running around with her for a while, that seems like forever, I feel a stitch on my side, and I think my ovaries just went on strike. I have had it. I am ready to call my brother to pick her up or bring me some cough syrup so I can drug her. When suddenly, Nana out a yawn. So I quickly grab her, put her in bed under the covers, bring her stuffed unicorn with her, and I look at her face as she closed her eyes and think, wow, she really looks like an angel. When suddenly, her eyes flew wide open and she sits up. I freeze. Then she throws her arms around me, plants a kiss on the side of my cheek, and says, I love you, good night, and plops back down to bed. I didn't know what to say. Suddenly, I feel a warm sensation on my chest, spreading around like a drop of ink on a glass full of water. This is the first time I've heard those words from my family. We're Chinese. We don't really talk about our emotions. We just talk about food. So I stare at Nana's sleeping figure. And I leaned over, gave her a kiss, and says, I love you too, Nana, as I turned off the lights. Thank you.
I think it would be remiss for me if I don't ask one question about this topic of AI.
Mm-hmm.
So, I want to hear your thoughts on, in your perspective, do you think AI has created opportunities or challenges for people to tell stories?
AI has helped. I would say there's two ways. Okay. I think AI is great in giving feedback on the story, especially if you go like, um, where do you see opportunities to build up the climax? Where do you see opportunities for us to open? Is it visceral enough? How can we do that? AI for me, so I created my own AI to give feedback on stories, but I still have my own viewpoint. I'm testing my AI to see who does it better, my AI or me. Because my AI has my knowledge, but has a lot of other. But I asked my AI, no, no, you're going to pull in from all these other masters too. So it's not just me, but then I want to see like who does it better. And I've compared it. I think, oh, okay, don't, I mean, I won't tell which stories were AI edited and which one was Anna Ong edited stories. Um, I would say based on the result, it's still the human touch that won.
Mm,
I would say getting AI to write the story for you, um, I can help because it doesn't sound like you. And also it's a little too polished. So like I said, with AI, we became a lot more polished in Word, but not so much in real life.
yeah.
So in live events, it still has to be you. You
Yeah.
have to be the one to deliver. And I find that with the age of AI, people become much more awkward in person, very polished, very elegant on text. But then when you meet them in person, they're like, this is not the same person I've been corresponding with, or this is like, really, this is the person whose post I've been reading.
Interesting. Yeah, I think, and that's why I'm so excited for What's Your Story Slam, because there's really just something that, at least at this point, from what I understand about AI just cannot replicate or even come close to. There's that. I remember when I was in the audience with my friend Steph, and we were just like smiling at each other, like, "Oh, we love that story," and we were just like clapping together and taking pictures of like the room and the stage. There's just so many little touch points and human experiences that you can't get from just AI.
And I would probably say that when you're watching that show, you just feel like everybody in the room is your friend. And yet you feel close to the storytellers, even though you don't really know them. It's like you feel like you're ready to approach them and talk to them as if they're a long lost friend at the end of it. Like so. I mean, I warn the storyteller sometimes like, sometimes you may feel a little raw, but everybody will want to hug you. So you just kind of
Mm.
be prepared for that. And I go like, and I tell them like, I know it will feel weird to invite your friends to watch because you feel like I'm so vulnerable. They're just gonna judge me. But they're the people who's just gonna be proud of you for doing it without even you saying a word.
Yes, and I think that ties in so nicely of how I approached you for this interview because after seeing you, interact with the audience on stage, and I was like, you know what, I need to message Anna and see if she'd be down to join me on this conversation on this podcast.
Yeah.
So Anna, as we start to near the end of the conversation, the
Oh,
final question I would love to ask you is, and to kind of tie back to the very first question we had earlier, which is right now, do you think there's stories that you are still a little hesitant to share, but you know you will at some point?
oh, oh yes. Well, actually, if you want to hear me tell a story, the September show, I'll be telling a story. I'll be
Mm.
telling a story at the end. I'll be the final storyteller. So occasionally I do save that spot for me, but it's just more stressful for me because I have to prepare. I have to prepare a story. Yeah, I definitely have a lot of stories that I still have yet to share. Because I also work with a therapist because until I'm ready to share them, like mentally and emotionally, I don't share. But eventually they will all come out in terms of like a lot of people ask me, aren't you going to share a story about you and your father? I go like, actually writing that LinkedIn post about me and my dad, I already started crying. I don't even know I'm ready to tell stories about me and my dad yet because it's still too raw. But at some point I know I will.
Mm.
But like with some personal friends and my family, we would talk about it, but it's not something I'm ready to share yet with a bigger audience. But I do
Mm.
share like as a written piece because
Yeah.
you don't see me breaking down because I was like
Yeah.
crying, ugly crying while I'm writing it. Then you don't see me breaking down when I'm writing it.
I think my biggest takeaway from this conversation today is how, there are definitely all of us have an abundance of stories, and some of them we may not be ready right now to share, but with time, with time, we will definitely see those wounds become
Scars.
scars, and then at some point we can really extract the takeaways and lessons and share it with others on
Yes.
a platform. But until then, there is no pressure. There really is no pressure to um, my cat decided to make an
And then
appearance at the very end of this conversation, but there is no pressure to share it, especially if you are still working through it.
yeah.
And I think that's the power of storytelling, not just for the audience receiving the story, but for you as a person who will share that story as well. And I hope the audience today can really take away a lot of nuggets from our conversation. So, Anna, where can people find you and or how can they work with you?
So I have a website, so www.anna-ong.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn because that's the social media platform that I am most active in. So I think it's just Anna-ong. You can find Google Anna Ong Storyteller or What's Your Story Slam. The show What's Your Story Slam has its own site as well. And all our events are out on Eventbrite. So for those who are looking for things to do, I have gotten people in the audience who, how'd you find out the show? It popped up on Eventbrite as things to do in Singapore. So I go, cool.
So good. So good.
Yeah, because they go like,
Yes.
we were visiting from Indonesia. I go like, really?
And to anyone listening, if you're ever in Singapore and you want to go to a What's Your Story Slam and you want someone to go with you, send me a message. I might go with you
Yes.
or I might go by myself.
Yeah,
But feel
no,
free to message me.
I designed the event that it's a space where you can go alone but never feel alone because everybody there is very, I think storytelling creates a space that everybody's just welcome here. Kind of like we're all sitting around a campfire like the olden days and we listen to one person in the middle telling a story, or we switch like each person takes a turn telling a story. So that's the kind of vibe that I want to create with the storytelling show is that everybody has a space. You will always have a seat for you. We'll find a room for you.
I can attest to that. That's how I felt at last month's What's Your Story Slam.
Yeah.
Amazing. Anna, thank you so much for being here. And to everyone listening, thank you as always. And I'll see you in the next one. Maybe you cringe when you read your own content, not because you think it's bad, but because deep down it doesn't sound like you. Especially when you imagine someone you know in real life stumbling across your LinkedIn posts, right? Or maybe a high school classmate, or an old boss, or that one friend who doesn't really get what you do, right? You know that feeling. And the hesitation happens when something doesn't really feel aligned and now it becomes hard to stand behind it. And that's when the self doubt creeps in. But when you're creating from your voice, your lived experiences, and your honest perspectives, you don't second guess every sentence. If anything, now the words feel clear, honest, and resonant. But then there's also this pressure to sound successful. I mean, when we scroll through LinkedIn, it's so easy to fall into the trap of mimicking what's working, right? The hooky one-liner, the neatly packaged lesson, the polished selfie that has nothing to do with the caption, right? And then as a result, we stop asking the most important question, which is, does this post actually sound like me? And here's something I had to learn the hard way. You don't find your voice by reading about it through a blog article or watching YouTube videos or listening to podcasts about how to find your voice, right? But instead, you find it by actually using it. And one of the most overlooked ways to develop your voice is through how you speak in everyday real world settings. So for example, how do you introduce yourself? For me, I used to say something like, oh, hi, I'm a podcaster and a coach. And then my voice would just kind of awkwardly trail off and I would try to divert the conversation to something else. And this definitely did not exude the confidence that I wanted to, nor did it communicate who I was or what I do. So one thing I actually had to do was start to practice how to introduce myself. Like I'd actually write out different phrases and I would say it out loud just to see how it felt. And eventually I landed on something that sounded more comfortable, more confident, and more like me. But I didn't just prepare one introduction, I actually prepared several versions of it. I had the more businessy version, like when I'm introducing myself when I'm speaking on a panel. I had a more casual networking, like going to an event kind of version. And I also had a version for when I know I'm talking to someone who isn't in my industry or isn't generally familiar with the work that I do. So all that to say, by reviewing how you use your voice, where it feels strong and where it feels shaky, you start to develop your muscles for speaking in your own voice. But here's the thing to remember. Your voice isn't something that you just magically find in one day, right? But it's something that you grow into slowly over time, right? And you find it by showing up and actually paying attention to what you're saying and rewriting what doesn't feel quite right. And most importantly, being willing to sound like yourself, even when it feels a little uncomfortable or a little risky, right? So if you're currently in the middle of figuring it out, keep going because your voice is already there. And right now, you're just getting better at using it. Sounds good? Awesome. Let's get to work. If you enjoyed what you heard today, well, there's more where that came from. For each episode of Edit History, I send the bonus strategies, insights, and frameworks straight into your inbox via the Annotations newsletter. This is the companion guide to each episode, and it is designed to deepen your thinking and help you take action. Join the newsletter at CherylLao.com/email. Again, that is CherylLao.com/email.